Hey guys, my name is Francisco Hernandez, and today I'm doing another episode in my Building the Shot series, which is a series on my channel where I break down everything that I can about how a single photo of mine was taken. In today's video, I'm going to go over this image on the screen right here of Sam that I took last year. I actually took that photo 6 months ago, and I wanted to make a lens review out of that photo shoot, which is why it took forever to make any sort of content or never even sharing the pictures from that photo shoot. And I just didn't like the lens a lot, which was a Sony 51.2. just because I prefer 35mm and 105mm with my Sigma lenses. So I never just made anything from that photo shoot, so that's why I'm doing it right now. So I guess that answers the question about which lens that I use, which is the 50-1.2 by Sony. The camera that I used was the Sony a7R III, which is my favorite Sony camera. I really like the megapixels on that. It's perfect amount, not too much, not too small, and it's a great full frame camera, so that's the camera that I used. When it comes to the lighting, I use the Godox 8300 Pro with the 85cm softbox 4 Godox mount, which is, if you didn't know, the Godox 8300 Pro and the 400 Pro, they don't use Bowens mount, they use a Godox mount, and there's some Godox modifiers out there that will attach directly to those lights instead of using an adapter, like if you want to use a Bowens mount modifier. As of the time of making this video, there's only 3 current Godox mount modifiers. I believe it's the 85cm, 65cm, and 60cm, and they both come in silver and white. My favorite of those 3 is the 85cm, which is the one that I use for this photo shoot because it's nice and big, yet folds nice and small and portable, so it's nice soft light, but not a hassle like with the bigger modifier. I did use a silver reflector, which has to do with the lighting, so that's why I'm mentioning it. I used it on camera left because, as you'll see in the photos I'm going to show you right now, it was very dark on camera left side of her face. So I used a silver reflector to just add a little bit more light in that side. Another really important thing that I want to mention is, although I do use ND filters primarily for my photo shoots now, because if you guys follow my videos, you would know that I stopped using high-speed sync because when you use high-speed sync, you do experience a drop in power with your lighting. And that's every lighting out there that uses high-speed sync. So although you might have, let's say for example with the 300 Pro, 300 watts available to you, if you use it in high-speed sync, it's only about 130 watts of power that you actually can use. So that's why I pretty much always avoid high-speed sync. But for this photo shoot, I'll explain in a bit why I didn't use ND filters and did use high-speed sync. Okay, so on the screen right now is the very first photo that I took from this photo shoot, but of course she's underexposed because the light is off. But I do want to show you guys some of the photos I took in this first initial spot that we chose in front of this building. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because, like I said before, I do typically avoid high-speed sync, but it was needed in this photo shoot because it was a very, very windy day. So I'm going to show you really quick some examples of the windy hair. So obviously it's not a very flattering photo, so I'm going to switch away from it in a second. But you can see that her hair is very, very messy. And I think on the right side here, you can see the EXIF data. And you can see I took it at 7:04 and 49 seconds. And in this very next shot here, her hair is down because I had to wait for the wind because it was just too wild that day. You can see I'm now a whole minute and 4 seconds later, which is way too much time to wait for the wind to calm down. And honestly, when I was just using the ND filter, you can see a lot of motion blur in the hair. You can actually see it right here and a lot of areas too. If I zoomed in, which I'm not going to do just because it's an unflattering image of Sam, you would see that there's just too much motion blur. So in order to cut out the motion blur and to get some nice crispy frozen action, I used high-speed sync. I'm going to go ahead and switch away from this spot and show you guys the images that I took in the actual spot where the final result was from. Okay, so now that we're here at the black wall, this was the very first test shot that I took in this new location. Take into consideration the settings right now, it's at 1/640th of a second, f1.2, ISO 50. But obviously I need to expose for my ambient first, so that means adjusting my settings till I like the background, and then I worry about the lighting. So let's go ahead and see what I did in this next shot here. You can see that it's definitely much, much darker in the ambient sense. I'm at 1/8000th of a second, f1.2, ISO 50. So basically the only thing I did was adjust my shutter speed to be much, much faster from 1/640th of a second to 1/8000th of a second, which made my ambient at this level. This image on the screen and the next set of images that I'm going to show you from this location are definitely underexposed by about 1 stop. The reason for that is because my camera screen's brightness is pretty bright. I actually like having it super bright on the max brightness so I can see the images much clearer on a sunny day, but it does give me a false reading. The image on the back of my screen will look fine exposure wise, but then when I bring it into Lightroom, it is about a stop underexposed. So right now, the reason why I wanted to mention that is because I'm gonna go ahead and just bump the exposure of the next series of shots right now, so you can see what exposure I basically saw on my camera when I was taking the shots. All right, so I just increased the exposure of all the different shots by about 1 stop. So that, take that into consideration, but also just focus on other things right now, like her composition or my composition and her pose, because those are two things that really changed throughout these next series of shots. The lighting did stay pretty close to her, because I feel like whenever the light's really close, it not only gives a nice soft light, but it also gives a nice punch. So that's why I typically always try to have my light really close as possible. So here's the first shot. Here's the second shot. You can see in this first one that I did grab a little bit more of that back wall behind her. And honestly, now that I'm reviewing these shots, I do think that it's a better, stronger composition. But for some reason at the time, I felt like I wanted more sky. I wanted to add more of that light pull there. So that's why I'm pretty sure I changed the composition. And in this second shot here, I was trying to kind of figure out where I want her pose to be, because I felt like the lighting was fine. I felt like I did like this composition better, but now I wanted to find a pose that worked in that composition. So that's me kind of just figuring out, what kind of poses that I want to use for this shot. So I do have her like lift the arm, I have her lower the arm, and basically what I'm trying to do is try to find angles that work with her pose. Whenever you have a boring shot, a boring pose, adding angles really does help kind of create a little bit more of an interesting shot. I have her like raise the arm, lower the arm, turn a little bit to the side, do different things like that. But sometimes it won't work. So here in this shot, I like this one because it's not going into that light pole. And in this one, I do like her expression better, but I feel like the light pole is digging into her arm. After I took this one, I believe I wanted her to just try something else. And I also wanted to add that silver reflector on the left side down, because again, I felt like it was too dark on the left side. I needed some sort of lighting there. So I added that reflector in this shot here, and I also had her turned. But when I asked her to do that, I really wasn't liking those shots. So I only took 2 of those shots here. And I think I asked my cousin who was holding the reflector to go a little bit closer. I just didn't like that pose with her against the wall. So then I turned back to have her face forward and told her if she can just raise her hand that's facing the wall or closest to the wall up against the wall. And then now I did like the shot, I did like the pose, and the lighting that from the reflector was actually filling in nice and nicely on the left side. And I took a couple more shots. So you see I took this shot, I got a little bit closer, she smiled now. It's just when you get a good composition, a good lighting, good pose, then you just take a couple of shots till you like more finer details, like her expression and maybe the way that the pose is specifically angled, small stuff like that. And then finally with this shot here, which is again pretty much the same one as the other one, but with the reflector just that's like maybe an inch or 2 closer, there was the shot that I decided was the one, and why I decided to edit it. You can definitely see there's a big difference between this shot here and this shot here. This one is only increased 1 stop in exposure. This one has a lot more adjustments. So I'm going to show you guys those adjustments right now. If you guys have seen any of my other building the shot videos or any sort of other editing tutorials, you know that one of my favorite things to do in Lightroom is to use the adjustment brush tool to adjust the exposure in different ways with my photos. So although for the shot here, the only thing I did aside from the adjustment brush is just raise the exposure 1 stop. And I actually left the white balance the same, and I also added a tiny bit of sharpening. I did no lens correction, and I also just added a little bit of exposure or saturation to the shot. So I'm gonna go ahead and just bring out the adjustment brush and show you guys all the different things that I did with the adjustment brush. All these different squares right here are all the different things that I did. So you can see that there's 4 things that I did. For this first one that I'm gonna show you, I did adjust the sky's highlights to be much lower in the highlight level. So you can see I actually put negative 100 on the highlights to really bring out the detail in the sky. So without that detail, without that adjustment, you can see that that's how bright the sky was. And I didn't want it to be that bright. I wanted some color in that sky. So one way you can do that is lowering the exposure. Another way you can do it is lowering the highlights. The second thing that I did was bring out the exposure in the eyes. So let's go ahead and see that. I'm gonna go ahead and delete it. and bring it back. And you can see that I always bring the exposure up about this much for dark eyes, because it's just for dark eyes, whenever I'm working with them, they really struggle to just shine even with a lot of light. So I do my best to help out a little bit. I'm gonna go ahead and zoom back out and show you guys the little bit of exposure that I brought up in the left side of the face. The very last thing I did was also increase the exposure, or actually the highlights, in certain areas on her face. So I'm gonna go ahead and click delete and bring it back. And it's very subtle, honestly, it's very, very subtle. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, and then I'm gonna click delete again. And then right there is the after. When I reduced the highlights in the sky, I did get a little bit on her arm and on her face, so it made her look too dull. I know there's some people out there, especially my own family members, that whenever they see a certain highlight on the face or the arm, they feel like it's too shiny and it's like not good, and they want me to reduce it. But for me, I feel like the highlights give it a little bit of life. Sometimes it's a little too hot, like in her cheek, I feel like it's a little too hot. But other areas where there's like, you know, just a flat tone, I feel like the highlight really gives the image life, or their skin life. So sometimes I will add a little bit of highlights to the skin. And that's pretty much everything that I did with the adjustment brush. But now I'm going to show you guys everything that I did in Photoshop. But actually, before I do that, I'll show you guys the behind the scenes, which is right here. And that's the behind the scenes. Okay, so now that we're here in Photoshop, let me show you guys everything that I did in here layer by layer. The very first thing I always do with my photos is do frequency separation. It just gives a little bit more softness to the skin if there's a little bit of roughness that I feel is there. And it also allows me to also smooth out a little bit of wrinkles in the clothing. But whenever I've worked with Sam specifically, or other soft skin models, I know that the soft skin that they have mixed with the soft lighting that I use, mixed with that feature, frequency separation, it makes them a little bit too smooth looking. So even though they do have smooth skin and it is soft light, it's something that you want to avoid, making them look too smooth. So it's not with frequency separation that I did this mistake, it's actually with dodge and burn. So with frequency separation, I'm going to just zoom in because I believe it's only mainly on her arms and her face. So right now we're here, and I'm going to go ahead and just click on it. So this is after frequency separation, before, after. So I did try to keep it very minimal on the face, because again, it's very easy to go over and make it too smooth, but I did do it more on the arms and maybe the legs too. Let me just go ahead and just go to legs and click before and after. Yeah, it's definitely more apparent on the legs. So I'm gonna zoom out and then do it before and after. And then now let's go ahead and show you guys the dodge and burn that I did and see how far I went. So again, here's the before and here is the after. But sometimes I'll overcorrect things on the face. So again, here's the before and here's the after. So I corrected too much. I corrected the little line that she has here, a little bit of the highlight in the skin, a little bit in the forehead. And because I did that, it can give an appearance that it's just too perfect. It looks too artificial looking. Usually with dodge and burn, you will want to kind of keep it organized. Global means like adding dodge, adding brightness and darkness to, you know, zoomed out and just kind of painting it over certain areas. And local, it means zoomed in and, you know, doing more specific detailed kind of dodge and burn. So that's why I have those labeled like that. But if I were to go ahead and just click on this grouped layer or grouped folder of different layers, and click on the masking tool and then paint black over certain areas where I feel like it's too, you know, the dodge and burn was too much, then that's how I would correct the over smoothing of the skin with that dodge and burn. I'm not going to do it right now, but that's just letting you guys know how I would correct it. And then I did a selective color, which is what I usually do to kind of alter the colors and make them how I want them to be in terms of skin tone or the background. I usually have two different selective color layers, one for the skin tone specifically and one just for the background. But in this case, I think I only did it to the skin. So it did make it a little bit from yellow tones to a little bit more of a natural reddish tone to the skin tone. And then I just made the image a tad little bit brighter, and yeah, literally 4%. And that was pretty much everything that I did to this photo. If you guys have any questions at all about anything about this video that I might have skipped over or rushed through, let me know in the comment section below. But for now, take care guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the very next video.